Hello everybody and welcome to today's video. Today's video is another one about a lens. It's some thoughts I have, first impression thoughts on this Pergear 25mm f1.7. You notice what's missing from the name of this lens, which is the letters AF. So when Pergear first reached out to me about taking a look and making a video about this lens, my initial reaction was to say no. And here's why. I haven't used a manual focus lens in a very, very long time. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But I slept on it and I thought, this would be an interesting opportunity to try something different, both from a technical standpoint and a creative standpoint. So I did say yes, and then the lens was on its way after. Let's talk about a few disclaimers first about this lens and the process of it. So when they first contacted me, I asked Pergear to review my ethics statement on my website, which I have borrowed from Tom Buck. He said that was okay. They reviewed that ethics statement, said everything looked good to them, and the lens was on its way. So they have not had any input into the contents of this review. They haven't seen this video. All these thoughts are mine. And as with all things, your mileage may vary because I have a different use case, different preferences around lenses. So I'll talk more about that along the way as well. So for one more minute, I want to talk a little bit about manual focus versus autofocus. I am so out of practice using manual focus lenses. I am so used to the half press of a shutter button to get focus to work. I'm so spoiled by the modern conveniences and magic of autofocus in modern cameras. So learning this lens was and using it was a lot of overcoming muscle memory of the way I'm used to doing things for the past almost 40 years of photography. So keep that in mind as I talk about things with this lens. So there you go. Before we get much further into the video, I want to remind you that at the end of this video, there will be a slideshow of some photos from a street photography day I had with this lens in Bellevue. So with all that in mind, here's some specifications of this lens. This lens is tiny, as you can see. It's very, very tiny, but it's very dense. It's all metal. To give you a little bit better sense of size, here it is on an X-T1, so it pairs nicely with these small cameras. Let's get that focus. There we go. So it pairs nicely with these small cameras. It is very, very tiny. But it is very solid, as I mentioned. It's made of all metal. It's about 5.3 ounces, which works out to about 153 grams. As far as minimum focusing distance, we get about 7 inches from the front of the lens. I just measured it with a ruler. That's not super scientific, but that's how it worked for me. And then last but not least, this lens is $75 US. So that's a pretty great value if you're looking for a lens that does lots of things. And I'll talk more about image quality coming up here as well. A little bit more about the lens itself. So the focus ring is extremely smooth. It's also pretty short throw from minimum focus to infinity. Aperture ring is also very smooth and nice and clicky. But it's quiet click. It's just enough resistance that you know you're moving it. And it's also just enough resistant that you're probably not going to accidentally bump it. So those are things I look for in aperture rings. So let's talk a little bit about using the Pergear 25mm 1.7. For me, the biggest adjustment in using this lens was the manual focus. I have my XH2S set up for manual focus assist with a red overlay. I find it's best for contrast. However, it's also, to me, most distracting in composing. So I'm still learning how to figure out the best way to do manual focus for my aging eyes. Plus, I have a little bit of peripheral vision loss in my left eye, which is my dominant eye that I use for focusing. So for my use case, it was a bit of a struggle. Also, I swear on a couple of the photos, I had the image in focus, and then when I went to review them in Lightroom, they were a little bit out of focus. So again, that's me so much out of practice in using this type of lens. Another thing I discovered in using this lens, because it's so tiny, and my hands are relatively not tiny. They're a little on the pudgy side, so the thick side. So in using this, you'll notice as I'm focusing, my left index finger is kind of tends to stray into the field of view of this 25mm lens. So I have an embarrassing number of photos with my finger in the lower left corner or lower right corner of the photo. So that's not lens flare. That's not any other kind of flaring. That's my finger. So yeah, another thing I need to learn in using a lens that's both this small as well as manual focus. So usually when I use a small lens, I'm able to just grip it more towards the back because that's where the aperture ring is. But for this lens with the focus ring, excuse me, at the front of the lens, I got to have my big old hand up here. So again, your mileage will vary. I'm sure with a little more practice, I would have less number of photos with my finger in the lower right corner. So yeah, it's me, not you. So another nice thing about the small size of this lens is it's so discreet. Put it on the XH2S and it just about disappears. It is so tiny. It's so easy to use for street photography. It doesn't quite look like a toy, but it's not as big as the 16 to 80 that's usually on the front of my camera. So for street photography or trying to be discreet use cases, that's really nice about using this lens. Let's move on to talking about image quality of this lens. If you've used other small, light, inexpensive third-party lenses, you're probably aware that most of them have some personality that shows up in the images. For me, I'm learning to like that. I'm kind of learning to even lean into that. I think it goes well with using film simulations or trying to get photos straight out of camera that have some look to them. I think a lens like this can be another tool to helping you create images that have a unique look. So for me, what I noticed in the images is just a little bit less contrast, just a little bit less saturation in the images that I'm used to from my Fujifilm lenses. The quality of the images though, the sharpness looks really, really good. I don't photograph brick walls, as you know, for corner sharpness, but in my use cases and noticing the lens, I think it worked really, really well. A note about all the photos you're going to see, they are edited in Lightroom. The way it starts for me, they're raw photos. Then I apply a classic chrome film simulation in Lightroom, and then I add my edits to taste. So they are edited and the way I would normally edit my photos so that I can compare them to what I'm used to in my photo world. So here's a couple examples. My friend, the downtown Bellevue Park with the Piloti, P-I-L-O-T-I sculpture against the Bellevue skyline. Again, I think this looks really nice. Corner sharpness looks good to me. I believe this was at f5.6 or f8. Here's at, I think, f1.7. Again, you show a little bit of the bokeh look. I'll talk more about that later. But it's got nice sharpness. Again, a little reduced contrast, a little reduced saturation, but I think it has a little bit of almost a film vibe to it. Also, a note here. This is at f1.7. We're going to talk more about the vignetting that you can see here. In that previous photo, I mentioned vignetting as an issue with this lens, and it's very noticeable, very prominent. It's noticeable even at f22, so something to be aware of. Here's what it looks like in kind of a studio setting with a plain background so you can really see the vignetting. So here's f22. It's there. This is just a solid green, so it should be not dark in the corners. F11, 8. By the way, there is no F16, so it's a jump from F11 to F22, 5.6, F4, and here comes the vignette in full meal deal strength, so f1.7. The vignetting is so strong and noticeable that as I was doing those test photos, I thought I was way off with my exposure because the photo got so much brighter because the vignetting was starting to get reduced. So again, it's very noticeable. Again, for my use case, as I mentioned in all my lens videos, I tend to add a little vignetting to my photos. In real world use, real photos, it doesn't yell too loud to me that there's vignetting in the photo, but it is there. So again, your preferences about that, you can edit it if you choose to edit around it, but it is there, it is present, it is a thing. Next topic for image quality kind of stuff, let's talk about Sunstars. I'm learning to have fun playing with them. I don't know why, but maybe it's the throwback to the Sunstar filter I had on my Pentax K1000 back in high school. So I like playing with Sunstars. It's just kind of a fun thing to check personality of lenses. So I like the Sunstars from this 25mm Pergear. I like the structure and the definition to them. It's quite nice to play around with them, and they look like this potentially. I believe this was at f22 or f11. I'm not 100% sure. One thing to be aware of with Sunstars, as especially if you're pointing it at the sun, you have to be a little careful. This lens is prone to flaring in certain just right angles or wrong angles, if you will, relative to the sun or the strong light source, as you can see here. But if you move just a little bit, you can reduce it. You do get still a little present here in the lower right corner. Also here, this is at f1.7. So, pay attention to this. This lens does have personality in image rendering, but as you can see, the flower's sharp. It's still got good contrast. It can be an interesting effect, interesting look, kind of cinematic, kind of filmic. Again, a little lo-fi, if you will, in your photos. Again, some personality. Here's another Sunstar bouncing off a building. And then this one here off the sculpture, and then off the sculpture reflection. Got a little bit of lens flaring going on as well, but it's pretty well controlled. So again, in my opinion, for a $79 US lens, this is a great value. So I really like the Sunstars. I think it's fun to play with. It's another, again, creative tool you have if you're out photographing and the sun is shining. So it's a fun thing to potentially integrate in your photos with this lens. One more thought around image quality. Let's talk a little bit about fringing, chromatic aberration, pointing at strong light sources again, high contrast backgrounds. Usually it shows up a lot with fine detail elements like tree branches or fence poles or other small vertical elements. You'll get some coloring around those. I didn't get a really big chance to play with this or to check it out. I did a quick photo in my front yard this morning with a tree with the sun behind it, and it's a little present as far as some fringing. I'll zoom in here. You do get a little bit of blue around the edges, but it's not real strong. And it's surprisingly well controlled here, again, for a really low cost lens. So nicely done here, Pergear, on this. So overall, so far, I'm really pleased with this lens. I mean, from a technical standpoint, it does a lot of things really, really well, and I've liked the image quality so far. Let's wrap up the image quality conversation with everybody's favorite topic for fast aperture lenses. Let's talk about bokeh. Bokeh? I say bokeh. Anyway, so for this lens, it's present. As a 25mm lens, there's not a lot of subject separation necessarily because it's a relatively wide lens, but f1.7 does give you a blurry background opportunity. So with this lens, you got cat's eye, those kind of oval shape bokeh balls in the background, especially around the edges. They're nice and clean though. Not much onion skinning or dots or anything in the bokeh. So it's nice and clean. It's got a nice presence to it, a tiny bit of swirl to it, a little bit to my eye, especially with foliage. But here's what it looks like. So here's an example of this rose with the out of focus background behind it. Again, there's a little sense of swirl. I think that's because of the cat's eye kind of look to it. And then here's just a blurry background just so you can see what they look like outside my front door this morning. So that's what that looks like. Here's a focus on the leaves in front, and you can see kind of a more real world example of what the bokeh looks like. Again, I like it. I think it looks good. It's pleasing. It's certainly, I don't think, distracting. It's kind of quiet but present, and it's good to be able to leverage this in your photos as you would like. So, some concluding thoughts on this fun little lens. And as with all lens choices, it's very, very personal. So in my specific case, this isn't the best fit lens, just simply because it's manual focus, and I am so very, very used to autofocus. Additionally, if I wanted to learn manual focus, in addition to the autofocus muscle memory to have to overcome, I'd have to adjust to being a right eye shooter to accommodate some of the peripheral vision loss in my left eye. And to be honest, that's just a little more than I'm willing to do for one lens. But it's a great lens. I can envision using this lens in some specific uses. I know I want to try it at night. or in other situations where I kind of want this really specific look, this look that's got a little bit of a retro and film vibe, even not cinematic, but kind of vibe. So for certain use cases, I know I will use it. It probably won't be in my bag all the time, but for certain uses, I'm really glad I have it. Additionally, so this lens at $75 US, and it's available for Fuji X, Sony E, Micro Four Thirds, Nikon Z, as well as Canon RF. There's a lens for you out there. So this is kind of cool. It is APS-C, so just be aware of that. It's not full frame. So yeah, so it's a neat option to have for $75 US. As long as manual focus is part of the joy of photography for you, this would be a really, really great fit. The image quality is quite lovely. I really like it. It does have a bit of personality, a bit of look, but in the age of film simulations and straight out of camera stuff, this is an additional instrument you can use to help create a look in your photos that is very, very unique potentially. So yeah, it's a good lens to have. I'm glad they're out there. It's nice to have these third-party options. So that's my thoughts on this lens. I do, as I mentioned, I enjoyed using it, and I'm grateful to Pergear for sending this over. Look forward to seeing what they're going to continue to do with their lens lineup. So coming up next, we have the slideshow of photos I made on a street photography day in Bellevue with this lens, so I hope you stay tuned for that. We'll do some more street photography videos in the coming weeks, so until I see you in a future video after you watch the slideshow coming up, stay tuned for that. I'll hope you stay safe, stay well, and have fun creating photos. Bye for now.